So we have been talking about the newspapers published from London, UK. The newspapers are called collectively Fleet Street. Fleet Street is the name of the street where most of the newspapers had their offices during the last century, and it is still the collective name of the papers published from London. And these papers, by definition, are London-centric. It doesn't mean the ordinary people of London are represented by them, but they are London-centric in the sense of the cliques and the cabals and the gangs and the groups that control the newspapers are based in and around London, and they represent the extended interests operated through the agencies, their agencies in the UK Houses of Parliament based in London. That is called Westminster Parliament because it is situated in the city of Westminster, and the Palace of Westminster is the name, collective name of the building. And it is supposed to be, the palace is supposed to be part of the domain controlled by the monarch, who is Brenda, or to give her official name, Elizabeth II. None of these people are affected by evictions, lack of housing, and the grotesque failure by local councils of their duties to the communities. So we have looked at half of the papers, and we are going to look at the other half, which is the Daily Mail. And the Daily Mail is concerned about the fiasco. They don't call it the crime or the criminal negligence, let alone actually perpetrated by any person called Boris Johnson. What they're concerned about is that the voters in a poll conducted by the Daily Mail, the people, ordinary people, are disgusted by the behavior of the government in robbing the children's grades exam, but they're calling it exam fiasco, and they're calling it Boris Johnson's silence on that so-called fiasco. Now, by any measure, by any evidence, any criteria of evidence, what is called admissible evidence, evidence that is accepted by the bureaucracy in the court system in England and Wales, the evidence is overwhelmingly that of criminal negligence and defiance by Boris Johnson fronted government and regime. It's not a fiasco. A fiasco suggests kind of unplanned incompetence and lack of coordinated action in time, on time, about an issue. But this is not a fiasco. This is part of the corrupt narrative, the corrupt agenda, the corrupt agenda and the corrupt purpose behind the forces that control the government. That is to say, the conservative forces that are unnamed, they are not members of parliament, they are not members of the House of Peers, but they are forces that control the Houses of Parliament through the members or membership of the House of Peers and the members of the House of Commons. The majority of the members of the House of Commons currently are conservative members, but they are not the authors and they are not the owners of the agenda that is operated by a Boris Johnson fronted government or was operated by a David Cameron fronted government. These are the forces that will remain unnamed, unidentified in most cases, but they are the ones who control the power in this country. Which is why the absolute priority for Democrats in this country is to actually have accountability, transparency established so that ordinary people whose lives are affected by the behavior of the couriers and operators of the agenda can actually see who these operators are. England, Little England, as people call it, those who don't agree with the England centric narrow mindedness, as evident in the case of the hostility to the migrants and the propensity to blame the French for the migrants wanting to come to England. That is complete trivialization of the reality, because what happens when somebody like this Sudanese migrant who died, when somebody like that is made the figure, the image of the invaders, then the real controllers of the robbery of this public in this country, against the public in this country, against the English, mainly the English numerically is the biggest number. So against the English people, the robbers get kind of protection from being disclosed, exposed to, and held to account to the people they're robbing. Now, this has been going on in England, and I say England, and I don't accept the idea that England is also Wales. Wales is an agenda, addendum. Wales is used as an addendum, as a decoration, and Cornwall is completely annihilated from the references. So, as I said earlier, Cornwall we shall come to in later parts or later editions. So what is happening in this country with the population and the brainwashing and the gullibility and the subliminal and direct brainwashing and corruption, the predisposition to accept this propaganda. This is why the zombification of the people succeeded on the 12th of December 2019. Because most people believe the demonization of Corbyn and anyone who was offering remotely any alternative to the reactionary right wing and absolutely racist, corrupt agenda being proposed by the Tories. Now, the Tories use race as a convenient kind of shortcut to incite the hatred of the victims, the white victims of the injustice that the state and the racists commit against them. They shift the blame. But when you look at the actual role of these people, the migrants who are made the scapegoat in the kind of brainwashing, the brainwashed majority of the white people don't find any evidence that any of these people blamed has done anything wrong. And because there is the media silence about who the real controllers are, and the media is colluding with the proposition that the little people, the most vulnerable people, are to blame for the failures of the most powerful. That's an absurdity. And the media hides the truth, and by hiding the truth, it lets down the majority of the white people who are kept in ignorance. So, the Daily Mail today is saying that Paul Fury, don't let children down again. Now, it's falsely giving the impression that it is speaking for the majority of the parents, but it is not. It is using the parents as a pretext, as a kind of lever to put the frighteners in, the electoral frighteners in the minds of the likes of Boris Johnson, saying that you will lose the election if you don't, or you will lose votes if you don't stop letting down children. But the reality is that when it comes to letting down people, people in low income, millions of people in Britain, all of these people are mainly white. The majority of the people who are forced to commit suicide were vulnerable white people desperately needing help from the Department of Work and Pensions, so-called, and they were coerced into committing suicide because they were made to feel mentally unable to control their emotions and their personalities and their frustrations, and they were unable to continue to live without any money. So thousands of people were coerced, thousands of white people were coerced to commit suicide by the government that says it stands up for the white people. It doesn't. It is a corrupt cabal, and it is a corrupt cabal that doesn't care for the poor white people, the vulnerable white people. The vulnerable people and poor white people and the uncared for white people that it actually has put in that condition. So the media know this and they hide this connection. Just don't say that these people are being let down by the very racists who use ordinary people's emotions and ignorance to inflate the image of the bad migrant who is taking over this country. To go back to hundreds of years, this country is made up, and it continues to be made up of people coming from other parts of the world. In terms of the work, in terms of the skills, in terms of the dedication. And if you look at the attitude of the brainwashed young people who are brainwashed into thinking that they have got a privileged status in that they are white people and they are not migrants. But they are not the ones that are white and young and not in work, not disposed to work. The only thing they are good for is to be incited against the imaginary invading migrants. So, this is the fault on the face of it, daily fault of the daily press and the daily media. They don't say this is what is happening. And therefore, the majority of the betrayed white people are left in a position of lull, insecurity, a real unsafe, unreal sense of security, which is the truthful statement is that they are really insecure. They haven't got the money, they haven't got the security, they haven't got any real status when it comes to asserting their humanity and human rights. So they end up hating the most deprived, more deprived than they are. And there is a vicious cycle. Newspapers and the mainstream media keep doing it. They've been doing it for decades. And the political people who are in control of the given kind of regime, control on the face of it at least, they don't do anything to stop the media behaving in this way. So there is this built-in discrimination against the majority of the white working people or poor people in low income, low housing, no housing. And the eviction court proceedings, even if they are banned for the time being, when they are restored and started, and they will be started, if not in September, maybe there is going to be another U-turn in September for another month. But eventually, the proceedings, court proceedings, will be started again. And the evidence is that the courts are run by cabals, gangs. The judges are not really any different in their attitude when it comes to the working class people, the poor people, white people, or the poor people, or hard-working migrants, because most of the immigrant people who come from abroad are the ones who work the hardest in the National Health Service, in public sector, in the transport system, all of these. So the attitude of the judges who sit in the county courts, the magistrates courts, these are the lowest levels of the court hierarchy, but the ones that handle the largest number of litigation and cases. So therefore, they affect the largest number of people in terms of the court cases. The attitude of these people, the judges are mainly barristers and solicitors. And some of them are not any of those but are selected on other criteria based on their quote professional kind of careers, etc. But they are not the main deciding kind of judges or magistrates. Used to be called magistrates, but the magistrates courts are now they're called now the county court and magistrate court judges are not called magistrates. County court judges were used to be before county court judges, but the magistrate court judges or magistrates are now promoted to be called judges, and this is the district judges. They are called county court ones, and the magistrate ones are also elevated. Their status has been elevated. Essentially, there is no training for the magistrates or the county court counterparts of the magistrates, no training about the fundamental human rights that are already contained in a number of anti-discriminatory UK laws passed during the 1990s, but essentially passed as an extension of the UK's then membership of the European Union, and as a result of the UK's signatory status as a member of the United Nations, which has got several requirements for its member states to pass anti-discriminatory legislation. But none of the judges, none of the magistrates, and none of the lawyers appear to be bothered about any of the anti-discriminatory pro-equality legislation, acts of parliament that actually exist. And the same thing happens with the media. They don't have any concern about these laws. So they carry on writing and publishing stuff against the migrants and the poor as if these laws didn't exist. And so therefore it's a very political phenomenon, a problem that needs to be tackled by the democratic representatives of the people who are deprived at every stage by this omission. That omission is not accidental, it's actually intentional. So it takes the responsibility for holding the executive, and the executive includes in this case the executive decision makers in the court system, the executive practitioners in the legal profession, so-called, the licensed law trade members, like the barristers and the solicitors. None of them is trained to even get acquainted with the basic requirements of the anti-discrimination, pro-human rights, pro-transparency, pro-equality, pro-universality, pro-transparency requirements imposed on them, imposed on the decision makers by the UK's status as a signed up member to any number of international treaties and any number of international conventions, any number of United Nations declarations. And this is happening in the media. And instead of talking about Boris Johnson failing under those criteria, they are making a kind of light kind of coverage. They're joking. They're having a mock of, and they're taunting him. They're taunting him, but they're not really hurting him. I mean, the taunting will go away, but they're not exposing him as a violator, as a breaker of the law, the legal obligations. And I'm here talking about all these groups: the renters, the migrants, the people betrayed by the DWP. And that actually extends beyond the newspapers into the decision-making points in every local council, including, in this case, as I said in the previous edition, in the London Borough of Tower Hamlets and in the London Borough of Newark. Now, for the first time in his entire career, Unmesh Desai, who is a member of the London Assembly for Tower Hamlets, Newham, and the City of London, he has actually mentioned a slight error by the or incompleteness by the Newham Council about stats and figures about the action needed to deal with the pandemic in Newham, because the number of people affected by the virus is higher than even next door Barab Tower. That is what he's saying. In a regular online monthly platform given to him by the group Archant on the East London Idiotizers kind of website shared with the Newham recorder. And what is happening is that this confession by Unmesh Desai brings home the truth that if you were truthful all these years before this time, a lot of people's lives and livelihoods would have been saved, because the Newham Council would have taken notice of being criticized by Unmesh Desai, who is one of their kind of co-careers. So what we are saying is that the elected post holder councillor or members of the assembly or members of parliament, if they speak or if they spoke in express terms about the local council or the local decision makers, letting down people, just like the robbers of the school exam grades have let down the children and betrayed the children en masse, then the behavior of these discriminating people, decision makers, would have changed for the better. But they don't speak. And as I said before, Urmesh Desai served as a councillor for a long time while Robin Wales was mayor of Newham. But Unmesh Desai never actually spoke out in criticism about anything that was happening and going wrong, while for 16 years Robin Wales was in the post of elected mayor. And there is this other council next door, which is Tower Hamlets, where the Borough Council is now misrepresented by John Biggs. John Biggs physically is a diminutive person, as he was described in The Guardian by a former Lambeth councillor who is a Guardian journalist. And as a Guardian journalist, he wrote in April 2018 that while he was covering the pre-election canvassing in Tower Hamlets, pre-election to the mayor election that took place in May 2018, he spotted that diminutive John Biggs at a location in E3. Now, Dan Sabah is the name of the reporter, former New Lambeth councillor. He stopped there. He didn't talk about the diminution of duties that it has been and had been already perpetrated by the diminutive John Biggs. And the reason why the diminutive John Biggs was perpetrating diminution of his duties every single day of the week against the rights and needs of the people, majority of the people in need in Tower Hamlets, people of all backgrounds, people of all gender and classifications, orientations. The reason why he was getting away with it, diminution of his duties, was because the elected councillors in Tower Hamlets were gagged, either voluntarily gagged or they were bribed into silence, bribed by John Biggs into silence. So there is no recognition of this failure, this diminution. In the local paper, which is the token newspaper, is, I call it the East London Idiotizer. The verb is it makes people idiots out of people, and not the term advertiser comes from a long time ago because local papers were advertising, mainly carrying advertising stuff, and they were being funded by advertising money. But apart from that, there is no real local newspaper. The demography in Tower Hamlets, as in November, let's talk about Tower Hamlets. The demography in Tower Hamlets is like one third Bangladeshi, Asian mainly, and one third or so English white people, and one third Polish people, white people. So two-thirds are white people, more or less. I mean, given the kind of margins that are inevitable in this kind of distribution, but I'm giving a sample for simplification. The one third that is Bangladeshi is being misrepresented by the so-called Bangladeshi counselors, the so-called Bangladeshi language outfits that are supposed to be catering for the information needs of the Bangladeshi community. So while the overall white Bangladeshi Polish population is being betrayed, let down by the East London idiotizer, lying for John Biggs, suppressing for John Biggs, and hiding for John Biggs and concealing for John Biggs, and allowing him exoneration from accountability for his massive failures. The Bangladeshi one, the Bangladeshi language kind of outlets, are doubly betraying the community, the Bangladeshi, because most of the ones that are like broadcast equivalents, they don't speak the language that is spoken by the people in the bara. They speak an imposed artificial language in this context that is irrelevant to the lives of the people in the bara, lives of the electorate in the bara. That is one level of betrayal and diminution and denial of duty and lying by these papers and outlets. The other is that the contents, whatever the language, the contents of their copy, the printed ones, are absolutely bogus and false. They are imitation, translations, and they're borrowed. I'll give an example. These people who come here from Bangladesh, like this migrant who drowned, most immigrants from Bangladesh, with a very small, insignificant proportion being the exception, the overwhelming majority of immigrants from Bangladesh came here to alter the economic life, to become able to afford things, because the currency rate is different and the income available from work in this country is better in comparison than it is in Bangladesh. So they don't come here as representatives or as agents or as touts of any Bangladesh-based political party or outlet. And yet the behavior, judged entirely factually by the contents of these so-called Bangladeshi language outlets, would suggest that these are all representatives of Bangladesh political parties. And Tower Hamlets is one big platform of political servitude to those parties. That is the contents of these outlets. So they are committing an intentional criminal act every single time against this very community. There is no room there of diagnosis, of course, of the behavior of the elected councillors, and there is no scope for discussing the failures of the elected mayor or anything. They are self-appointed, they are intentionally servile, extensions of the propaganda purposes of John Biggs and the elected councillors. So there is no major contribution being made by the so-called ethnic papers. I'm not looking at them because they don't come out in this way and they're not worth reading because of the criminally dishonest contents that I have already outlined. So what is happening is that there is no discussion in those outlets, the discussions about the failures of the social system, failures of the unfit for purpose government fronted by Boris Johnson. There is nothing, absolutely nothing about the impact or the implications of the Brexit and the propaganda. And there is no real rigorous discussion, examination of the evidence about racism. And there most certainly is nothing, absolutely nothing, about the UK breaking international treaty, charter, and conventions. So, what the Fleet Street Press is doing is, like there is a saying that when in a field at dark night, there is nobody to watch what a wrongdoer may do. The wrongdoer may do anything, any wrong, and nobody would be able to stop them. This is what is happening. There is a darkness, as I said yesterday, but I have been talking about this darkness for a long time. And only this week, for the first time in my awareness, my knowledge, anyone from the USA has actually used the term as a concept of darkness. And Joe Biden has used the concept of darkness in the same way that I have been using for all these years. And he has used that word and term and the concept of darkness when hoping to topple and defeat the darkness that is embodied by and personified by Donald Trump. So the darkness we are experiencing in Britain about the lack of accountability by the press that the Boris Johnson fronted government is subjected to, it is not subjected to. So that absence in the darkness is confounded, if it is possible to confound that darkness, by the role in Tower Hamlets of the so-called ethnic language outfits in all media, print, voice, and video. And they are intentionally committing crimes because they believe that there is no legitimate platform of ordinary Bangladeshis that can hold them to account. And they are in cahoots with the councillor crooks. So they know that they are with the co-criminals who are committing democratic crime against democracy. Majority of the Bangladeshi councillors are in cahoots with the corrupt gangs. It's not my imagining. Several Bangladeshi councillors have been found guilty of fraud, literally fraud crime. So it's not my imagining, my fantasy. So these papers do not, or these outlets, the Bangladeshi so-called outlets, don't hold these people to account for their crimes and criminality. And so therefore, what has happened, these papers played a criminally complicit part in letting Lutfur Rahman stay in the post of mayor, knowing that he was doing many wrong things. As these newspapers and these outlets are also against the democracy movement for the scrapping of the elected mayor post. And it goes on. So we have got a darkness intensified many times over in the case of boroughs like Tower Hamlets. And I have discussed before the role of the councillors in Oldham, in Rochdale, and other places where the white girls were groomed by the organized Asian, mainly Pakistani, sexual attackers and sexual criminals. And the role of the councillors and the councils and the police was absolutely crucial because they essentially stayed silent for years while the girls were being criminally violated and their lives destroyed. So we have to look at the role of the papers as much more relevant to the lives of communities than it appears to be the case when most people talk about it's papers. It's not papers. It is the weapon of propaganda, weapon of concealment, weapon of collusion. So that applies to the Bangladeshi language outlets in tower hamlets as it does to the Archant Islam idiotizer and as it does to the Daily Express, which is again kind of starting to ignite a hatred against the EU in the latest round of negotiations. And it is so committed to hating the EU and the Europeans that it has reduced the coverage of the three towns facing tighter lockdown as infection soared to pages 10 and 11, the Express today. So the Express's priority is to spike, to raise the hatred level against the EU, not against the virus. And it sums up its agenda, its narrative. As I said before, the secret, unknown, unnamed forces that control the regime, the government, want Boris Johnson to be shielded and protected from the failures and the negligence and the criminal negligence. And when they kind of pretend, the Daily Express, to be aware of the political kind of current, they say that Boris Johnson should behave like a Churchill. This guy is repeatedly caught almost without his political kind of robes almost every time. And they're still fantasizing that he should be behaving like a great Churchill. So the newspaper, the Express, is completely shameless. And it is put together by a bunch of absolutely shameless, ignorant, irresponsible people who show two fingers to the ordinary people being betrayed by the Boris Johnson fronted regime. And the I newspaper on Saturday, the 22nd of August 2020, is dropping its own pretensions. It pretends sometimes during the week to be a serious paper, but it is so easily duped into coming out as yet another tabloid, imitating the agenda of the Sun and the Daily Express and the Star. And they're talking about public sector borrowing hitting £2 trillion. But there is no examination of why such a huge sum has been reached of public debt and where the most of the money procured is the word I'm using, as a negative word, as a kind of illicit word. Most of the money procured in the name of public sector borrowing for the government. Most of the money, most of the furlough scheme, most of the help that Rishi Sunak has given in the name of helping business has gone to the business entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurs of corruption. the entrepreneurs who also are linked to the Conservative Party by donations, by inclinations. So the money is not actually spent in paying the welfare costs. Most people are blamed for the poverty state they're in, the poor state they're in. And the money is not spent in defending, in upgrading the standard and the aims of the NHS, and the provision of health at the point of need remains an illusion, and it is not being delivered. And even before the pandemic hit the country and exposed the NHS to severe pressure, the NHS was being starved of basic funding at the basic level. The main money was being stolen systematically by the consultants and the suppliers who are private medicine operators and private movers and shakers of the agenda that shaped the actual draining of the NHS for decades. So the NHS, or the public health preparation in this country, was in dire state of unsuitability, unfitness, made worse by the lack of care and the lack of respect for all the people needing the treatment, and prejudice against the immigrants who constitute a large proportion of the working population in the NHS and the health service and the public service, played a significant part in exposing the NHS and the public health apparatus to serious failings. And the failings will never be fully exposed and accounted for, because there is already manipulation of numbers, manipulation of statistics, manipulation of data, hiding of data. So the algorithm technique that was used against the children of the ordinary families and ordinary schools has been in operation elsewhere in the so-called health service. Algorithms have been active, and they are not talking about it, but without algorithm, there cannot be any computer system. So therefore, they're not talking about the word, but the actual fact is that there has been the operation of the same deception and fraud by computer and statistical manipulation, thus proving once again the truism that statistics is actually another way of lying. And there is a piece, the column by Janet Street Porter, that tickles Boris Johnson. It doesn't really rigorously examine his negligence or his dishonesty, but it tickles him. And she has made a career for decades by tickling people, coming across as a trendy one, but she is not rigorous at all. So we leave Janet Street Porter there. Now, on page 24 of the I newspaper, there is a rare piece about the impact of the Western sanctions stunt on the poor and the powerless people in Syria. And it is written by Patrick Cockburn. The spelling is Cockburn. So those who are not familiar with the Irish pronunciation, they would pronounce it as Cockburn, but actually it's Cockburn. Patrick Cockburn is one of the sons of the old pair of the Cockburns, and the old pair of the Cockburns refer to the founders and publishers of the original paper, The Week. The Week newspaper was a very noble newspaper during the, let's say, war years, as they say. His name is Claude Coburn and his wife. They ran this Week, and it was a small operation, but it had tremendous temporary influence during the war years because a lot of leaked vital information was only published in the Week. So Claude Coburn's son, one of the sons, is Patrick Coburn, and he is one of the less corrupt reporters covering Syria or the Middle East. And he's saying the Syria's poor and powerless are the only victims of sanctions, which is absolutely right. And this is where the connection between war and migration and migrants is to be found. And without going into details, every day hundreds of sick people come here, but the hospital is already full. Let's talk about one hospital in Syria. Now, if that is how dire the situation is in Syria, is it any wonder that people, if they find a chance, an opportunity, would want to look for a better place out of that kind of despairing lack of basic amenities and basic facilities? And so therefore the migrants against whom Boris Johnson declared war 2 Mondays ago, and Priti Patel carried out the war by deploying Navy, Air Force against the migrant dinghies. Can you imagine? That is how stupid these people are, and they are our government. So, the people who are desperate to flee poverty and hunger, not only in Syria, as Patrick Coburn says, but in Libya, in Afghanistan, in Iran, in Yemen, in other parts of Africa, are put in those positions by the behavior and the policies of governments like the one fronted by Boris Johnson and others like among the French Macron. So these policymakers behind the war and behind the famine and behind the poverty and desperation are also refusing asylum applications from the likes of the 28-year-old who drowned this past week in France. So where are these people to go? As I said in January 1992 in my broadcast on the slot after the Channel 4 news, the only solution to the migrant crisis, viable, sustainable, real, genuine, universal, non-racist, universally fair and just solution is to start helping the victims of war and famine in their countries with sustainable, real, economic, educational, social, humanitarian programs to run throughout the year, every day. That is the solution. Not running a scare story about a migrant dinghy coming to Dover. So there we shall, for the time being, stop talking about that topic, but we'll come to the topic if we find the relevant imperative reference to it in the papers that demand our diagnostic attention. There is on pages 4 and 5 of the Star, Daily Star, Saturday, 22nd of August 2020, a piece about Boris Johnson, who is really being given the full glamping treatment in the picture. And they are focusing on his apology for using the glamp gap, whatever that is. They are not talking about the crisis in the economy, and there is no way that they are dealing with the other failures that Johnson has been guilty of. This editorial so-called comment about Johnson's failure said that Boris Johnson really must think we are stupid. His secret holiday hideaway has been revealed to be a tent next to a cottage. But the PM even bungled camping. He upset the locals by pitching up in a farmer's field without permission. Fat chance he's actually spent any nights under the canvas. Can you imagine him trying to heat a tin of beans over a stove outside? Pull the other one. After all, this is a man who likes the finer things in life. His most recent getaway was a luxury winter break on a private Caribbean island. And there is nothing wrong with that. But spare us the patronizing guff about all being in this together. This isn't a man who is prepared to make do like the rest of us. Now, that doesn't come anywhere near doing justice to the rights of the people that he is betraying. They demonized Corbyn at every chance, and they're not questioning his motive. They're not questioning his career of lying. They're not questioning his integrity. What they're saying is that he is incapable of doing these mundane things. That's not the same thing. They are actually letting him get away. And that is not fair to Corbyn. That is not fair to the country that Corbyn was saying he wanted to serve better. And that is what is wrong with the media. They are willfully blind and dishonest, and they are completely unjustifiably unfair to any force or power that is against the conservatives. And the Murdoch son is doing the same thing with this diversion. They're not talking about Boris Johnson, they're not talking about the housing crisis, they're not talking about the NHS being starved and robbed. They're talking about this little actor who got involved in a fight with the police, four police or whatever, abroad. So if the government is not fit for purpose, and if the media turns a blind eye to its unfitness, where are the people to go for justice, for the truth, and for competence and the rigorous analysis of the failures and the urgent provision of the service that the people deserve and are being denied of? And the son continues taunting him without calling him negligent, let alone criminal, let alone a liar. All of this, based on his career of lying, are justifiable adjectives that should be used. And they would have used these against Corbyn if Corbyn were caught doing a tenth of this kind of excessive acts of negligence and unfitness for purpose. And there is no discussion about housing rights, and there is absolutely nothing about the failures of the Conservatives in delivering the services. And there is no sign of the country being invaded by landlords poised to evict hundreds of thousands from their homes and expose them to deadly disease and deadly insecurity. There is nothing in the in the sun. So anyone reading or picking up this paper, which is picked up and read by more than 1 million people according to the statistics, what are these people looking for and what are these people stuffing their heads with? So that is the question. And the media in this country is as inglorious, as disgraceful as their counterparts in any country that is condemned as a banana republic. So we need a society where the newspapers are responsible, rigorous, and demanding and absolutely alert to the duties that the politicians, the publicly paid and publicly elected politicians, owe to the country. And unless that happens, the country will continue to descend into darkness. And no matter what promise the likes of Joe Biden may make in America, or the corresponding counterparts make in this country, the country will not be rescued and the country will go down. So that is the part two of the diagnosis, exclusive world diagnosis of the Fleet Street Papers by myself, Mohammed Haq, and in the KhoodeelaarTV channel. There are a few disclaimers here, the legal stuff. This is done by the Khoodeelaar campaign and this is not done commercially. So we do it with our own resources and we don't get any public funding, we don't seek any public funding. Only thing we seek is to tell the truth and share the truth and share the finding of our exclusive investigation into the media, into public life, and into society. So anyone who is interested in engaging in a constructive, honest, ethical debate or sharing of views with us can look us up in the search engines and write the word Khoodeelaar, Khoodeelaar, and they can find us on Twitter and other accounts, and they can contact us through those. There is no use sending us any direct message because we don't monitor direct message, and for security and safety purposes we don't encourage direct messages because we cannot predict the kind of element that might get into the access that we have generally by the public platforms on the social media. But essentially the name Khoodeelaar is the key. If you type that in, it will produce all kinds of results, and including the Khoodeelaar Twitter account and other accounts or other articles and videos and contacts. We are running these as the test phase of the broadcast. The word test only refers to the technical side of it, not the contents of what I'm saying. The contents of what I'm saying and contents of what I am presenting are absolutely as valid as they would be if they were not test phase kind of broadcasts or recordings. So the contents are covered by the international law of authorship, the British law of authorship, and anyone who genuinely for constructive and positive social purposes wants to refer to any of these must expressly acknowledge the source, the name of the program, the name of the presenter, editor, and the date and time and the rest of it. Otherwise, they will be in breach of their legal obligations and will be opening themselves to claims according to the law. But that is not what we intend to do, but we are just making sure that people are aware that this is a open kind of platform, opened and run by us at our own cost with the sole purpose of helping people understand society. And we assert, we are not boasting, but we assert on the evidence that there is no comparable outlet or channel doing the same service, bringing the same quality or standard or depth or range of information or analysis or diagnosis that we are doing. When we finish the test phase, we shall be starting in a more formal way, and we shall announce, like in the background, we shall announce schedules and program names. We shall have a diversity of programs that will cover all aspects of political, public, social life, and it will address all the difficult issues that humanity faces and the difficult issues the population in Britain faces, regardless of the backgrounds and the ethnicity and the orientation of the gender and whatever. This is an educational program essentially, and it is the education is necessary when there is darkness, because the BBC and the mainstream Sky and ITBN, Channel 4 and others are restricted by their own inhibitions. So they are not telling the truth. They are most of the times going with the flow of the powerful, and they're only tinkering with the criticism and critical thing. We are not doing that. We are not intending to do that. Our purpose is universal. And as we have been publishing, the universality includes the United Nations. We have been critical of the United Nations, but we are not opposed to the existence of either the United Nations or any of the others who we criticize. We criticize in order to serve the purpose of telling the truth and sharing the truth and the truthfulness of the people who will be viewing. One word about the number of followers and viewers. We are intentionally limiting the number of people who can view this. We are not recruiting followers and we are not spreading it. Now, people may be surprised by that because most of the tendency is to get as many viewers as possible, and that is the evidence of the quality of the program. That is not the case. We are proving it. We are posting it. We are publishing the contents, just like as if we have published a book or an article or a magazine. It is for the seeker after the truthful program to find us. We do not want to peddle it, and we most certainly are not boosting it by paying anyone extra money to reach viewers. We have been rejecting the ordinary suggestion that come online, hundreds of followers every single day. So that if we had accepted the followers, that would have amounted to about 12,000 followers by now in the last 2 months. But we have not been wanting the followers. What we have been focusing on is to tell the truth and put it on the record. Put the truth on the record. Anyone who disagrees with our finding, our presentation, our contents, is most welcome to constructively engage with us with dignity and respect, and we shall be engaging back. But if they don't agree with us, they don't have to necessarily contact us. We are just saying this, that we are putting our findings on the record based on our evidence, our investigation, our research. And that's it. That is the basis. Anyone who can find alternative and can disprove anything we have said or cited is welcome to point this out. And one responsibility that lies with every broadcaster, every publisher online is to respect the unknown viewer. I'm not aware who will be eventually watching this, where they will be watching this. So therefore, I have no prejudice against any of the viewers who watch us. Even about the people I have been criticizing or reporting critically on, I have no personal agenda against any of them. The objective, moral, ethical purpose is to tell the truth and share the truth, which is the test, the only test of the veracity, the standard of the goodness of how good this program is or this endeavor is. So until the next edition, this is coming to 20 minutes past 4 GMT, that is 16:20 GMT on Saturday, the 22nd of August 2020. Until the next edition, goodbye.